Well, I said in my first impressions video for the Solar Crown demo that I wanted to come back at the end of the demo period to make a sort of final review on my experience with the game so far, while also picking out and addressing some of your comments from that first video. I also chatted with a few other community members about the demo and ran a poll with my community that had some pretty interesting and concerning results. We'll cover that and much more throughout this video. I have now spent about 25 hours total with Solar Crown, and have done more or less everything major that you can do in the demo. Hit the level cap, drove all the cars, tried multiplayer, etc. So I feel like I have a pretty decent perspective on what the game feels like as KT has presented it. And I actually want to start by talking about how KT Racing has presented the game so far, because I feel like calling this experience a demo might have been the wrong call. Now, I know that this was timed out to release alongside Steam's Next Fest, where tons of games release early demos for people to try out, and Nacon just wanted to ride that wave and capitalize on all the people that would be browsing through Steam for demos to try. I also think that most of us who've been around the gaming world for a while know that the lines between a beta and a demo are pretty blurred in some cases, and even when a studio releases an early access beta, most people still treat it as a demo anyway, and have an expectation that things aren't likely to change too much before release. The communication on how close this build is to the final product has not been super clear, and it wasn't even until most of the way through the demo period that we got this interview with the game director that finally helped shed some light on where the demo's at and how much it represents the final experience. The problem is that this is just one article on one website that was released a week after the demo started, so most people aren't gonna see this, but I can try to amplify it as much as possible here in this video. This article states that the demo is a pretty final vertical slice of the full game. It's specifically said that they are not going to be adding more features before release, and that all they've really done for this demo is restrict things like, of course, the cars, parts of the map, and the Solar Crown League. They also confirmed what I and many others did already assume: the build we are playing is old, and things like bug fixes, handling tweaks, and performance optimizations have already been worked on or improved in the internal build. Ultimately, this whole article is just a situation where you can take their word for it or not. I've seen it go either way in the past, but my big takeaway is that this is a pretty final representation of the full gameplay experience. And it's not like they're still working on a bunch of new features or something that we just haven't seen yet. And so, because Nacon has chosen to present the game to the public like this, and have gone on record saying that it's pretty close to the full gameplay experience, I do feel like it's fair to critique the game as it's been presented. So with all that said, the servers and game performance are in a pretty dang rough state. I mentioned at the end of my last video that if the online doesn't work, the game won't work. And even though it's gotten a bit better throughout the week, presumably as less people are playing, in many ways, the game right now doesn't work because the servers don't work. You need a server connection to do anything, whether it be loading into or even just restarting a solo time trial, or simply installing a single car part. It communicates with the server for everything, and if the server is slow or not responding, it breaks the game. I entered dozens of races in my time playing, and many of them just failed to load in the first place, booting me back out into the open world and causing me to have to load back into the race to try again. But even when I did get in, I was always racing by myself. In the roughly 20 hours I spent with this demo, I raced with one random person once, and they didn't even finish the race. Now, I don't know if the game had an issue that caused them to leave, or if they just quit out on their own, but overall, that's bad. I even had a point where I just completely at random ran into Alex7 in the open world, which was really neat. It was fun to see him, and another person came over to join us, and we all entered the same event at the same time, but when I loaded in, I was by myself again. Later on though, I ended up playing with a group and we did all load in together, but not even halfway through the race, it disconnected all of us. For what it's worth though, on the second try, we made it through the whole race without issue. And I know some of you are wondering why I'm harping on the server issues so much in a beta where they said to expect server issues. And yeah, I am okay with this stuff in something like an early beta, but this shows the problems of always online games, and my concern is that it's just in such a rough state right now that if even 10% of these issues are still happening in the final game, that's going to be too much for most players. It's going to be frustrating, and it's going to cause people to quit. Also, something I didn't bring up at all in my first video is the actual frame rate and performance, which is in a pretty rough state too. I have a very good PC, 4080 Super, 13700K, and 32 gigs of dedicated RAM. I played the game on almost max settings with FrameGen and DLSS off, and I have a 1440 Super Ultra Wide that's pretty comparable to 4K resolution. My frame rate, while using the standard 16:9 aspect ratio, was pretty much locked in at 60, but when I used the full 32:9, it would end up floating around the mid-40s with dips into the 30s, which actually, in my opinion for this state of the game, probably isn't too concerning. And I do think it's likely that I'll be able to hit 60 on max with my PC on release. However, obviously people with lower spec PCs have been running into much worse issues and really high VRAM usage. The FrameGen, ambient occlusion, reflections, and DLSS implementation are all pretty rough right now too. I definitely expect performance to improve to some degree before launch, but kind of like with the server performance, I just think they have such a long way to go that it's tough to feel confident they'll be able to polish up everything and get the game looking and running great in time for launch. All of that said though, a lot of people have been criticizing the graphics, and I just don't agree with that. For one, previous mentions aside, I actually think the game looks pretty dang good. I mean, these environments are beautifully lit and well detailed, and honestly, can we please stop over-criticizing games for not looking like the most advanced next-gen AAA blockbuster? Like, I'm sorry. Not only does this game look pretty good, but we don't get to all reminisce about how amazing the black box Need for Speed games or old Gran Turismos were, and praise Night Runners for being the greatest new game ever, and then turn around and complain that Solar Crown, which is made by a smaller studio, doesn't have the most impressive graphics we've ever seen, or that it looks like a PS3 game. This is what a PS3 game looks like. And for the record, these games were still fun. It just feels hypocritical, and that mentality is what causes studios to put so much of their effort into making their games glorified screenshot generators that end up running like crap and have limited content and bad gameplay. The Solar Crown demo runs like crap for sure, and has a good few post-processing issues, but it still looks fine, and guess what? Graphics never make the game, gameplay does. So let's talk about the gameplay, and I actually want to begin with the map itself, which I did bring up a bit in my last video, saying that it had some really cool areas, but was kind of small for a TDU map, and it felt like a total ghost town. And I generally still find all of that to be true. While a lot of the areas can feel kind of samey, with similar foliage and buildings used throughout a lot of the map, ultimately, I feel that's overpowered by just how dense the map feels. This is one of the most well-designed cities in a racing game ever, because it's modeled after a real city. The highway is also fantastic because it feels real. And there are tons of great twisty driving roads outside of the city too. There are some well-defined landmarks to make certain areas feel more unique, and tons of cool driving spots. Like I said in my last video, there are a handful of underground parking garages, a racetrack, some amazing deep off-road trails, and much more. The overall detail and density of the environments and roads are genuinely incredible. I still am bummed that the map is small compared to TDU 1 and 2, but I think that's a smaller issue after spending more time exploring the parts of the map available to us in the demo. Again, my big issue with it is just how lifeless it feels. There are almost no people anywhere on the map. The few people they do place around just stand there silently out of the way, and the ambient audio is so quiet and empty. This is also the case in many of the interior areas. The background audio is just so quiet and underused, further making the game feel empty. There is one kind of neat exception to this though that I noticed, where sometimes NPC traffic can be heard blaring music in their cars, which is a cool touch. I'm also sad though to see so few interactable areas in the map. I mean, we've got the dealerships and workshops, but clothing stores and hairdressers are gone, as well as, of course, real estate offices and player homes and clubhouses, and courier or transport missions and the other more unique open world driving challenges are just gone entirely. These are things that helped TDU stand out back in the day. So the framework is there, the core map itself is very good, but they just didn't fill it with enough life or interesting and unique TDU style content. I really hope this is something we see more of post-launch. Now, I don't want to just keep rehashing topics from my first video, but after now spending much more time with it, I do want to talk about the physics and handling again, before also talking about the main gameplay loop and online and social features as well. So to start us off with the handling, I think for me, this game lands somewhere between The Crew and Horizon when it comes to open world, non-sim driving games. And obviously this is super opinion based, and people are going to disagree with this, which is fine. But for me, Unbound is like a 4 out of 10, Motorfest is a 6 out of 10, and Horizon is a 9 out of 10. Solar Crown to me is like 7 out of 10. It's enough to be enjoyable, and man, this is way better than TDU 2, but especially as you move into faster cars, off-roading, or are just pushing the limits of the lower spec cars, some problems start to arise. And before anyone comments saying that, oh well, I just don't know how to drive the cars or skill issue or something, I was setting plenty of top 10 and even some record times, which I'm sure have been beaten by now. I never went back to check, and I'm not trying to boast or say that I'm really good at the game, just that at least I feel I'm good enough to have a decent understanding and perspective on the handling. So let's talk about understeer. Many of the cars can feel fairly understeery, but I really don't think it's much of a problem. After all, this game is marketing itself more towards sim than arcade, and I actually think they did a fine job here. The braking, weight balance, high-speed turning response, and throttle management especially all feel pretty solid. But in a game marketing itself as something more sim than Horizon, the fastest way around a corner shouldn't involve hitting walls or props or ripping the handbrake. And in many cases, it does. In my experience, in most corners that would normally involve moderate to heavy braking, it's often faster to just hit a wall or lamppost or something, rip the handbrake, and or heavily engine brake in order to get the car to rotate and slow down faster. And because the cars have so much grip and not a ton of momentum, you don't lose that much speed and can get back on the power really quick. And like, even though I do think they need to implement the same dirty lap detection that Horizon has, from a handling perspective, the engine braking and handbrake usage is fine on its own, but when that's paired with other attempts to make the game feel more like a sim, it just creates this awkward handling model that feels artificially challenging and slow until you learn how to reliably bend the physics to get way more rotation and braking, which is obviously a very arcadey characteristic. If they did give the cars less understeer on turn-in, it would make the driving feel easier and a bit less sim-like, but also help reduce the snap oversteer issue and make the handbrake somewhat less powerful. But honestly, none of that is even a major issue. These are kind of small nitpicks that don't mean too much. The countersteer and oversteer feel is where the real problem is. It's very hard to push and keep a car at its limit in a corner, and instead it feels more like you're fighting the game and the controller because you don't have a good feel for the grip limit, and if the rear end does start to get out from under you, it often just snaps out and you can't countersteer enough to control it or bring it back in. There's just no good controlled limit of grip. Your only option is to let off the gas until the game gives you enough front grip and steering angle to pull the car straight again. This game is just terrified of letting you manage controlled oversteer and slip angle, and it means that grip cornering is more about trying to prevent excessive understeer and guessing where the grip limit is while really hoping you don't find it, instead of the more realistic feeling of finding the balance between under and oversteer and feeling out the limit of your grip and pushing right up to it. Drifting is also much more about trying to hold very shallow slides and giving yourself a ton of extra time to slowly transition, instead of actually being able to flick the car and control the drift with your throttle and brake input while sitting near full lock. You can have a handling model that feels fun or feels realistic, but the drifting and oversteer in Solar Crown don't feel like either. The game uses speed-sensitive steering, which, like of course it does, almost all games do, that's totally cool. It just makes it so when you turn the wheel at high speeds, it doesn't suddenly jerk the wheels to full lock, causing the car to explode, and when you go off the throttle and slow down, it then lets you use more steering angle to turn tighter in slower situations. Real cars do this, video games do this, it's totally fine. However, this also applies to the countersteer on controller, and means that when you need to turn the wheel more at speed to countersteer, it's still only giving you a part of your full steering angle until you slow down and let off the gas. This is also paired with the fact that they wanted to give the cars a lot of grip, so they wouldn't be too oversteer happy, but would still feel kinda sim-like. So the rear tires grip up a ton, and the fronts don't. So in a slide, it feels like you're running limited steering angle with a really staggered tire setup, which all leads to a lack of ability to control the car in a drift. There's obviously more going on behind the scenes, but the snap oversteer feeling and lack of ability to countersteer both feel bad. And that, paired with other things like the OP handbrake, wall or prop taps, and engine braking, makes for a handling model that's a weird mashup of some sim-like qualities, some arcadey ones, and some that are just straight up poorly tuned. Ultimately though, I genuinely think the handling is fine, if not a bit weird, but I've spent so much time talking about it because it's so important to me, and it could certainly be better. And I think a lot of that actually just comes down to the controller input tuning, instead of the actual physics themselves. While I would like to see more momentum and weight and adjustments to mechanical grip, I do think the core physics are pretty solid, and the game just needs some minor tweaks to feel a lot better. It's also worth bringing up these driving modes before we move on, because I hadn't used them yet in my last video. We still only have access to the 4 preset modes, and don't know what the custom modes will look like, and maybe this will be a place for us to really get more out of the car and tune it to our liking, but so far, just based on these presets, it doesn't really seem like that'll be the case. Some of the modes straight up just make the car slower, and I mean that's totally fine. It's actually kind of cool that you can slow down the throttle and steering response to put the car into more of a cruising daily driver mode. But then the other more race-focused modes like dynamic, sport, and circuit just didn't have much of an actual effect on the handling feel. They'd change things like gear ratios for sure, but all the cars in all the modes that I tested still had the same general handling characteristics across the board. So I don't have a ton of faith that even the custom modes will bring out too much of a different feel and be able to solve the issues I have with the existing handling model. Alright, now we need to move on to the gameplay loop itself, what you actually do in Solar Crown. And there's a few main categories and a good few things that weren't available to us in the demo. There is some open world content with speed gates, collectibles, and road discovery. You have your own personal reputation level, and you have a clan level. Your character's level dictates things like car and upgrade unlocks, which I think is fine, but some people reasonably take issue with it. And your clan level seems to just be a stepping stone for clan-specific rewards, and unlocking the ability to race the 5 clan leaders in order to keep climbing rank up to level 50. Clan rank can be earned by doing things like clan races or instant challenges, and your personal level goes up by doing just about anything, whether it be exploring or racing. All of the racing is meant to be PvP, but when it can't find enough real players, the game fills them with AI drivers. A lot of the longevity for me in racing games is in the leaderboard hunting, which does exist here too. Most events have leaderboards, but we'll touch on that a bit later. And I think for most people, the goal is just going to be to reach the max clan level of 50 and get the nicest hotel room and a lot of cash to buy and upgrade the cars they want. The big content cycle that they're planning though is the PvP league and seasons that will reset probably every few months. Through special PvP races, you'll be able to climb league rank and get rewards. There will also be weekly rotating live events with their own leaderboards, which we have gotten a small taste of in these early access periods. And these could be something that add a lot of motivation to the endgame content loop. The rewards just need to be worth it, and the PvP needs to be fun and engaging. And right now that's hard for me to comment on because I've always just been racing against the AI. It's all hard to judge now without the full feature set in place, but I do think the gameplay loop is at the least decent enough for your average racing game. But there isn't anything that feels inherently TDU about it. It just kind of feels like a mashup of Motorfest, Unbound, and Horizon without much of the old TDU DNA. Ultimately though, TDU at its core has always stood out to me because of its social interaction and light lifestyle elements. And boy do we need to talk about this. Right now in the demo, max group size is 4 players. And max lobby size, as far as we can confirm, is 8. There can never be more than 8 people in any space, and you can see that designed right into the workshop that has only 8 bays. The game is also currently region locked, so for example, players in the US can't play with anyone from Europe. Even the leaderboards are split between different regions. So if you set what looks like a top 10 time or world record, well, it might not be because someone may have set a faster time in a different region, but you can't see that. The game is also not crossplay, meaning that PS5, Xbox, and PC players all have separate versions of the game and can't play together. This is all really concerning. And I mean, some of it might change. The nearby window does show a total of 32 possible players, so maybe they'll incorporate larger open world servers. But as far as some of these other issues go, I feel it would be kind of weird to design something like a server infrastructure that's separated by region just for the demos and playtests, and then end up merging everything for the final release, especially without communicating any of that to the player base. So I feel like this might be what we end up with. Region and system locked servers with a max of 8 players in any given lobby and only 4 in a group. If anything spells doom for Solar Crown's success, it's this. If TDU isn't the social car MMO game, then what is it doing to be different? And let's talk more about the existing social features because there's just not a lot to do here either. I mean, right now, in the demo at least, there's no ability to invite players to your hotel room, and there's nothing to do in the hotel room anyway, except change clothes. TDU 2 allowed us to not only purchase and own multiple unique homes with their own custom garages all around the island by discovering and traveling to real estate offices that all had different inventory, but also let us customize the interiors of those homes and even let us hang up our in-game photos as wall art in our houses. I mean, what a genuinely incredible and immersive feature that, as far as we know, isn't in Solar Crown. So what's the point of even having these rooms? I mean, what's the point of any of these social spaces? There's nothing social to do in the clan VIP areas. No gambling, no interactable furniture, no mini games, or anything to do with friends. There's no real reason for the workshops to be multiplayer because why would you ever watch someone else customize their car? All you can do visually is change the wheels and the paint. Even the hotel lobby has really nothing to do from a social multiplayer perspective. They built all these spaces for multiplayer out-of-car gameplay and then forgot to actually put anything in them. I feel like all of these areas may as well just be menus. Now, this is something that I could certainly see them expanding on over time. You know, adding gambling to the clan areas, more shops in the hotel, or customizable rooms. But again, I can only critique my own experience and what they've said is coming. and they haven't really said anything about any of this. They did say that player housing is a hopeful plan for the future, but won't be in at launch, so take that for what you will. In all, there just isn't enough that feels especially social or MMO-like about Solar Crown. In fact, in many ways, it feels much more lonely than TDU2, which was able to host dozens of players in the casino and clubhouses, and TDU2 also had a full single-player career and could be played offline, things that can't be said about Solar Crown. So again, if Solar Crown isn't any of these things, then what is it doing to make itself different? I mentioned at the beginning of this video that I polled my community about the game, and it had some pretty concerning results. Here's what I asked. Are you more or less excited for Solar Crown after playing its demo? Only 14% of the people polled said that they were more excited about the game. 40% said that the demo made them lose interest in Solar Crown. And if a demo is supposed to do anything, it's not that. I gotta be honest, I have been really looking forward to this game. I absolutely adored TDU 1 and 2. They're so special to me, even though both games had their issues, and TDU 2 had a really rough start. And even 10 or so hours into this demo, I was still thinking to myself, okay, it's got issues, it'll probably have a rough launch, but I think I'm still gonna have a ton of fun with it. And while some of that feeling is still there, I mean, I like the concept of the PvP seasons, the car sounds are amazing, I think the map is pretty dang cool and fun to drive around in, even if it does feel devoid of life, and the handling is pretty fine once you figure out its quirks. But when I saw the limited group and lobby size, restricted servers, and lack of social features and lifestyle elements that made TDU special back in the day, a lot of my interest fell away. I still want to go to bat for Solar Crown and KT Racing. I want the game to be good. I mean, why wouldn't you? We need more AA and indie racing games from more studios that are trying new and innovative ideas. And I still think that there are quite a few things KT Racing can and will improve on before release or shortly after, but in some other areas, the writing is on the wall. There are core fundamental shortcomings with the game that are going to hamstring its success. And even though I still think people have been overwhelmingly unfairly critical of Solar Crown, that doesn't mean that there aren't still valid concerns from real longtime fans that just want another awesome TDU game. Alright, now before I let you all go, please fill out the official demo feedback form for Solar Crown. This is the best way to have your voice heard, and studios use this kind of data way more than random Reddit or Discord conversations. So if you want to let them know what you liked and what you didn't like from the demo, follow the link I put in the video description and play your part in making Solar Crown the best possible game it can be. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.